Samano mantra samiti samani samana manasaha chittamesham samani vaakuti samana hridayani vaha samana mastu mano yatha vasu sahasati. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat. Come and be your prayer, come and be your end, come and be your purpose, come and be your deliberation, come and be your desires, unified be your hearts. Unified be your intentions. Perfect be the union amongst you. Om. Peace, peace, peace. Good morning. Today's talk is going to be an introduction for those of you who aren't that familiar with the Gospel of Ramakrishna and its author, Mahendranath Gupta. You're going to know a lot about him before we're done today. So, in the Hindu tradition, divine incarnations have appeared. And we know about it because when they have appeared on earth in India, Rama, Krishna, someone was there to record the teachings left by that divine incarnation. It had to be kept in a form, be it passed down by word of mouth or in a written form. These divine incarnations seem to have an entourage of one or more who will make sure the message that they have to give to the world is going to be spread long after that incarnation is gone. So, Rama had Valmiki, Krishna had Vyasa, and in these modern times, Ramakrishna brought M. M is the pseudonym for Mahendranath Gupta, and we know him simply as M. Those of us who have been involved in the reading of the Gospel of Ramakrishna from our beginning, it is a vital book, a vital scripture of our tradition. Why is that so? Because that book is the container for not all, but all of the pertinent messages that Sri Ramakrishna came to leave behind on earth in this was 150 years ago or more, but for this modern time. Ramakrishna's main message was the harmony of faiths, rather than the victory of one faith over another, as the last many hundred years has been with Abrahamic religions and other religions. So this message is something not delivered by previous incarnations. Mahendranath Gupta, M., it's good to know a little bit, where did this messenger come from? I'm going to spend a little time on the biography. Hopefully we'll run through it quickly and I'll try to keep track of time today. So, I'm going to talk a little bit more about just a brief introduction on these Gospels and where they came from. The book we know today that we sell, we distribute, every Vedanta society uses usually this, call it the King James of Vedanta in America, King James Bible for Christianity, the Swami Nikhilananda edition of M's diaries is what we know as the Gospel of Ramakrishna. M would visit the Master on weekends mostly, and as a messenger who was fit to be the one and the only one to put the teachings of the Master into vivid context. M's gift is this. M had a photographic memory, not just for reading text or reading books. M's ability to notice all the fine details, the nuances, the feeling in the room. He had a poet or an artist's mentality to notice detail, and he noted it perfectly. So by the time when M writes a description of the story, or while he was still alive, he would talk endlessly about his visits to Ramakrishna, repeating over and over to as many people who kept coming to him. M lived a pretty long life till nearly 78 years old. And up till the last, his house was open for anyone who wanted to hear from him directly what the Master's message was. So the current book we call the Gospel of Ramakrishna, it covers about 3 years only, the final years of Sri Ramakrishna's life. I may use the word the Master. I'm referring to Sri Ramakrishna. It's commonly how we think of him. Swami Nikhilananda's work on that book was also considered in the West a masterpiece, a literary masterpiece of such description and depth and capturing the entire mood, all the nuances that are necessary to bring a story to life. Like going to a very well-done movie and becoming completely lost. You've forgotten instantly that you're sitting in a theater. You've joined the story on the screen. Swami Nikhilananda's ability also, with edited English and editing out a lot of repetitions, created. In 1942, this book was published. It has not been, nobody has improved it since then. We're talking 80 years, and I don't think we have a Swami in the order who feels that he would dare to make too many changes in that original copy, because it seems to be almost perfectly done, if anything can be perfect. Okay. So, and the other thing that M's diaries were not in a chronological way necessarily. And so we weren't, and the original diaries, what Swami Nikhilananda did out of 177 diary entries, he put it into a chronological order so that we could go day by day often, week by week, or month by month. Sometimes M was absent over those 3 years. He couldn't make it on weekends. I'm going to now just spend a little time into M's background, so you have some idea of who he was as a human being also. Our idea of M as an adult M, his picture is known with like his picture and his name as Master Mahashaya. When he was older, he would go by that name. And some pretty famous people, authors, have come to see him and extolled their amazing visits with him. I'll read a little more of that later. So M was a householder. He was a married man. His early life as a youngster, as a boy, even by 7 years old, he actually had begun keeping diaries as a 7-year-old boy, noting details of things. This is known about his earlier life. He came from a fairly wealthy and elite family in Calcutta. So as a young boy, he had all the advantages of the very best education, and because of his gifted ability for noting memory and detail, and he was also by nature inclined to spirituality, inclined to want to talk about God, want to read about the great saints of India before him. So even as a child and as a young man, his exposure to spiritual life, as we call it, and highest spiritual ideals, being able to realize God, that idea is what is predominant in Hinduism, that God can be known. So he went through, his education was intimidating in the sense of always graduating first or second in his class from elementary school onward through the higher levels, what we call high school, through university, and higher degrees in university. M's wish as a budding teacher and scholar, he ended up marrying quite early in life. He was married at 19 while he was still in the university. He was his dream was to go to Cambridge, England, and get a law degree, as many elite Indians were able to do in those days. But all that got dashed rather instantly as the finances of his own father and everything, he could not afford to pay for that. And even thinking he would get the law degree locally, he had to drop out of law school and get a job. And initially, he worked at a business firm in Calcutta, the same place his father was working at. And that kind of office work completely did not work for his temperament. Later, he took a job as a teacher in one of the schools in Calcutta, and you can say he found his niche in life and was an amazing teacher. He had the gift to be able to inspire in students self-confidence. He would not talk down to them. He would not intimidate them or demean them. He would create in his students a love to want to learn the subject, the topic, whatever the subject was. So as his reputation in Calcutta spread, the better high schools, the most elite high schools, wanted M as a teacher. And within a short time, he became a headmaster of the high school, which was owned and created by one Pandit Vidyasagar. He was a known name in society of the day for running the highest level of education schools. Anyway, at that same time, so M is now a teacher. He's a headmaster of a school. He's teaching. He's also married. This is after going through a few teaching jobs for about 8 or 9 years. He's now 28 years old. He's married with 4 kids. He lives in a joint family, a combined family with his brothers, sisters, families. This is how it was in large, wealthy families of those days. Everybody's living in a gigantic big house together. And as you can imagine, that could be a little chaotic. And in the case of M's very nature required peace to exist, peace in day-to-day life. And what was delivered to him in his joint family was chaos and noise, argumentation between the various members of the household, the different wives. He described it as extreme selfishness. Everybody has their own self-interest in mind only. The atmosphere became unbearable. And he did not know what to do, and he contemplated suicide as a way to escape this unacceptable living situation. But he's got kids, he's got a wife. He was completely miserable to the point of contemplating killing himself just to find some peace. He did not do that, thank God, because we wouldn't have what we have today. But he did take drastic measures. He had decided to leave that home in the middle of the night and just run away, as it were. His wife already had some clue to what was in M's mind also, and he I don't think initially was intended to bring her along with. He wanted to just go, but she said, no, don't leave me here. And they left in the middle of the night, hoping to go to his sister's house. He did not have, there's no reservations booked in a hotel, a motel to go, or a lot of money. He just fled, and she fled with him. And he tried the sister's house. They weren't very receptive to it. He ended up finding another friend who let them stay for the time being to try to regather enough peace of mind. And as you might guess, this is the very time M has his first meeting with Sri Ramakrishna. Because the friend who they were staying with, the nephew of that friend, Sidhu is his name, invited him, why don't you come to this Dakshineshwar temple garden? There's a Paramahamsa there, come and see him. And M was willing to go. And with the first visit, I'm not going to go into the details of the visit so much, but the very first visit, the conversations that took place, and you'll find that in the Gospel of Ramakrishna, M was totally transparent as far as for the reader about how he felt coming to meet for the first time this saint in Dakshineshwar, as though he has left the most chaotic hell of this world and has walked into like a valley of Shangri-La, of peace, of beauty, of everything about it, so meshed with M's yearning for some peace and tranquility, and to meet Sri Ramakrishna, who already had the idea that we are taught that the divine incarnations, they know the past, the present, and the future. That certainly applies to Sri Ramakrishna. When he would first meet those who would become significant people in his life, or in the role in the story that the avatars come to deliver, he knew he may not have. He did not say anything to M like that. Oh, finally you have come. Let's begin. You're going to be my my biographer. No, nothing like that. He saw a frazzled man who was just grasping at strings to hold on to his life, searching for calmness and peace. And when he walked into the gardens of Dakshineshwar, that's exactly what he found. And when he saw Sri Ramakrishna in his room and had a little conversation, just some inquiry, who are you, where do you live? Do you live with your parents, as joint families do? Some of these things revealed M's difficult situation at the time. But like someone who has found the best coffee shop in town for modern day, you're going to go back and back. So M continued to have a few more, 3 visits, because M was so highly educated, and he had also, at that time, been drawn to a group led by Keshav Chandra Sen called the Brahmo Samaj. And the Brahmo Samaj premise of the whole thing is that because India had been under British rule for nearly, I think, about close to 400 years by then, or 300 years, the people of India were subjects to foreigners. They were just the slaves. They weren't the people in charge. They didn't run the government. They had been slaves for hundreds of years, as it were. Not slaves, but subjects to the British government. So the mentality was there that perhaps our religion is responsible for it. Worshipping these gods and goddesses the way we have been doing, that's not right. So the Brahmo Samaj adapted something like the Unitarian view in Christianity, that God is formless without form. So the idea of image worship had been dismissed by the Brahmos, the Brahmo Samaj. They would be called Brahmos. They did not accept any of those things in their worship services. And M, although he grew up in a traditional family, worshiping deities, and he found devotion and love in his heart for those, but he, as being on a very high intellectual level, a scholar, a headmaster, a brilliant man, liked the ideas initially of the Brahmo Samaj, that yes, somebody should be there to teach the Hindus that God is not that statue. God is not this image or this picture on the wall. That's not God. Someone should be there to tell them. And when he made such statements to Sri Ramakrishna, he got scolded hard, saying That's the problem with you Calcutta, English-educated Calcutta people. You want to bring light to the world, as though your English education, these aren't Sri Ramakrishna's words, this is my paraphrasing, as though your English education has made you superior to others and put you in a position to judge thousands of years of spiritual life in India. You need to be the one to tell others, don't worship images, don't do that. How can, that is a big mistake. The idea that are you an enlightened soul, that you should be the teacher for all these other people, that's a pretty ambitious idea. And M listened to him. He was humbled. Instead of, he tried to argue just a little bit with Ramakrishna, but saw that this unlettered priest of the Kali temple was not someone to be argued with. Every word he spoke made perfect sense to M. And he was willing to accept the advice of this priest in the Kali temple who seemed to be so peaceful and happy, and many people would come to him. Many important people of Calcutta were already coming to him, as M was about to find out later. So after 2 more visits, after the first visit, M never argued with Sri Ramakrishna again. The next visits, he spent a few days in the temple garden. Sri Ramakrishna asked him to come and spend a little time away from his family, and he did that. And Ramakrishna taught him how to meditate, how to think of God, and introduced and injected the idea that God may have both form, is both with form and without form, contrary to the Brahmos ideas. M had lost most of his interest in the Brahmo Samaj very quickly. All right, so over a period of about 3 years now, M became an intimate of Ramakrishna. And Ramakrishna knew that M would go home every night and write down word for word everything said by the Master. Everything he heard, word for word. Not only all the words, but he would describe in detail every person who was there. He would remember their names. If they were talking together with each other, if he overheard that, what they were talking about. When the Master was there, often the Master would be there, and he would maybe encourage some to talk to others, wanting to see how they would approach the topic. And other conversations that would be going on, he would disparage and not encourage, and the people would usually get the hint and stop. M recorded and noticed all of this. And so as we read the Gospel, we are drawn into the room, the scene, as though he brings it to life to us in a way that seems impossible, just by reading words. What was M's secret gift? Very quickly one can understand. M made himself invisible. M did not want his readers to be acknowledging him. He did not want to distract one iota from the message and the meaning of Sri Ramakrishna. He was like a fly on the wall, as it were, but he was a man in the room. But how he recorded the conversations and repeated them in his diaries, M's existence was almost non-existent. He would use the word M. His name was Mahendranath Gupta. He would use a couple names, Mohini, Manindra, Mohini Mohan, or M, in writing in the diaries. He knew, and he had been taught by Sri Ramakrishna, that the biggest obstacle in anyone's spiritual life is our own ego. Sorry, it has to always come down to that, but it does. M had no problem understanding that, but his extra gift was being able to nearly eradicate it, at least with this task that he took on. Actually, to emphasize how this happened, Ramakrishna knew that M was recording things. And now and then, a few places in the Gospel, he records this also. The master is asking him, "What did I say then? What did I say then?" And M would repeat back what seemed to be almost perfectly, but he would say, "It's not just that." He would be corrected to a complete, exact takeaway. Not only the words, but the intent and the meaning of what those words were intended to teach. The same words may be interpreted differently by different people. The master was verifying that M had understood him correctly. And at that time, there were very many different takeaways about who was this Sri Ramakrishna. Was he a saint? Was he a madman? Many people thought he was a madman, but he was a divine incarnation. The master probably in that way had no self-doubt, in the sense that he spoke directly to his divine mother, and she told him what to say. To believe that and to understand that, it took being in the room with him and watching him do those very things. He would be in ecstasy. He would go into samadhi where he's not even aware of his body consciousness. M understood that his task was to stay out of the way while he wrote this. And much to the credit of Swami Nikhilananda, when M's diaries, M, by the way, wrote the original diaries in English, not in Bengali. This is a Bengali land, but his original diaries were written in English. A couple years later, he wrote those diaries in Bengali. I'm going to give you some dates to work with. So M was visiting the master from the years around 1882 to 83, 80, mostly 83, 84, 85. 86 is when the master passed away. So it was really about four and a half years, I guess. But, so that was in the 1800s. The master passed away in 1886. 2 years later, M wrote his diaries out in English, and they were published in a magazine called the Brahmavadin. It was a journal that was started by the Swami Vivekananda, who in 1995, once Narendra became Swami Vivekananda to India and the world, he started this journal, and he wanted to have M's diaries published in English. So that was 1888. So some time goes by. In 1907, M took the first 4 chapters plus another 10 chapters and produced a book called The Gospel of Ramakrishna that was subtitled The Ideal Man for India and the World. That was 1907. So our order had been started. Our monasteries had been started. There was a New York center in 1898, I believe it started. In 1912, Swami Trigunatitananda, who was a disciple of Ramakrishna, had come to San Francisco and started quite successfully a center there. He published a revised edition of M's book from 1907, where he removed the repetition. So this is kind of interesting. I can see we will be running out of time. In M's journals, and you can still we have something called the Condensed Gospel of Ramakrishna. It's a little paperback book. It's available in our bookstores. And that is written in M's English. It's not a edited version of Swami Nikhilananda's Gospel. That should be understood. That's M's original English. It's very flowery, very poetic, and it almost reads more like a poem in prose, but you'll recognize, if you've read already the Nikhilananda Gospel, you will recognize that M then reveals how poetic his temperament is, how, yes, flower, I don't have all the adjectives, but I first read that book. I used it as a travel book because it was small. I wanted a copy. When I would first go to India, I would take the condensed gospel and I would read that because it packed better. So I don't know if that is the book Swami Trigunatitananda published. There's many things that remain to be looked into. By the way, I'm going to take a moment, and I see my time is running out. See all the pages here? I want to read to you some of the people who met M out of this, and some of the things that M was taught. But this book is a biography on Mahendranath Gupta, written by Swami Chaitanyananda, one of our senior-most swamis. He's in St. Louis. He has written most of the most readable books in English on the direct disciples, on the householder, both the monastic disciples, a separate book about this size, on householder disciples, as well as the monastic disciples. But he has finally put out, he has a book on the Holy Mother also, by the way, but this book on Mahendranath Gupta, a bit of it you'll recognize a lot of outtakes of the gospel, but with some commentary and a lot of extras that have been omitted. M's diaries, not every part of M's diaries have been included in the gospel. And there's a lot of extra information in here for those of you who want to go more deeply. Buy this book and read it for yourself. It will take a while. It's excellently edited and published. What I want to do now is take you on a little journey with M and just read some of the conversations. These are not found in other places. So this, after the Sri Ramakrishna had passed away in 1886, one of the householder devotees who had been paying up to 1,000 or 100 rupees a month, back then that was quite a bit of money, for the care of Ramakrishna, now that he'd passed away, there was this ragtag group of young renunciate young men, boys, college students basically, who had most of them who had already dropped out. Sri Ramakrishna did not encourage any of them to complete their college education, by the way, as our swamis all do today for different reasons. But these were to become the great disciples, the illumined souls of Ramakrishna. A dilapidated old mansion was rented in Baranagar. We call it the Baranagar Mat. So I'm just going to share a little bit with you. And in this case, M refers to himself as Mani. So this is a little outtake here. Narendra and Jnana Yoga. So M and Swami Vivekananda are discussing the paths that can be followed in spiritual life. Devotion or the path of discrimination. Baranagar Mat, on this moonlit night, Narendra and Mani are walking on the eastern veranda of the Master's shrine. It is the night of the full moon, when the goddess Lakshmi is worshipped. Narendra and Mani converse about the Master and also about Jnana Yoga and Bhakti Yoga. Mani. The Master described two paths, knowledge and devotion, and said that both lead to the same goal. The followers of Jnana and the followers of Bhakti reach the same place. Narendra says, this is Swami Vivekananda, the young Vivekananda. Narendra. But the Master told me, the knowledge of Brahman is the goal. Devotion is meant to maintain the external aspect of life. The elephant has outer tusks and inner grinders as well. The tusks are mere ornaments, but the elephant chews its food with the grinders. Mani replies, the Master also said that one can attain the knowledge of Brahman through the path of devotion. The knowledge of Brahman can be attained through the path of knowledge as well as through the path of devotion. Perhaps you remember that the Master also said, he quotes, after attaining the knowledge of Brahman, some embrace devotion and live in this world. One can then ascend from the relative plane to the absolute plane and descend from the absolute plane to the relative plane, the Nitya in the Leela. Narendra says, were you present that day when the Master talked about the knowledge of Brahman at the Kasipur garden house? Mani, I was not present at that time, but I heard he talked about it for a long time. Do you remember what he said about Shukadeva? Narendra, no, I don't remember. Mani, I have heard that the Master said on that day, Shukadeva and sages like him may have been big ants, but they could carry at the utmost a few grains of sugar. Shiva touched the water of the ocean of Brahman consciousness, or at most drank a handful of that water. Did you hear such things? Narendra, yes, the Master said many such things on that day. So this is a very different kind of conversation, a one-on-one between M and Narendra. We don't this book has more of these. We don't find that very often. I am going to be ending today's talk to be able to allow for some answers, but some questions, I'm sorry. But I'm going to share some reminiscences, or some parts of reminiscences that reveal, this is when M was an older man, This is 1931, and M actually passed away in 1932 at the Morton Institution, where M actually would keep a room on the very top floor, and people would visit him there. I'm just going to read. This is a reminiscence by Amulya Krishna Sen. So Morton Institution, June 15th, 1931. Amulya is writing, I arrived before evening and found M walking on the roof of the school building. The walls of the roof were so high that one could not see the buildings around. The devotees were seated under the blue sky. I bowed down to M. M said, you see, the master said to the devotees, Bhagavata, Bhakta, Bhagavan, meaning the scriptures, devotees, and God are one. God is the Bhagavata scripture. He is the devotee, and he is God himself. M goes on, Krishna said in the Gita, M was very studied in the Bhagavad Gita and some of the other Hindu scriptures. He was also a scholar, and he, from his boyhood, knew these books and had many of them memorized. So he goes on, Krishna said in the Gita, even the most sinful man, if he worships me with unswerving devotion, must be regarded as righteous. The most sinful man must be regarded as righteous if he worships Krishna. For he has formed the right resolution. Proclaim it boldly, O son of Kuti, that my devotee never perishes. This is a quotation from the Bhagavad Gita. Is a devotee an ordinary person? A devotee does not know how great he or she is. This is what M is saying. A devotee responded to that. It is better not to know, otherwise one may develop pride. That is not so. M disagreed. A true devotee has no ego. Excuse me. The master compared the ego of a devotee to a burnt rope. If you blow on it, the ashes will fly away. Excuse me. So this ultimate teaching of M it always comes down to the same thing. Excuse me. It's a very emotional thought, because all our spiritual problems in spiritual life end up being this one problem, the problem of the ego, of our own will and wanting things our way. This is so revealing when M says, a true devotee has no ego. When I read such a thing, I can't remember reading this before. It's profound beyond profundity. No real ego in the sense of a true devotee has understood that his own ego is nothing. It is his biggest obstacle. That M has learned through his own life's practice. M learned to abolish his ego. As the recorder of the life of Ramakrishna, to such an extent, he never had to question the trouble of the ego for the rest of his life. He understood where the problem is. Once the ego is conquered, then the devotee is free. There's nothing for him to be afraid of. There's the criticism of others, of public, self-criticism. Why waste your time criticizing your own ego in the sense of it just needs to be abolished, if possible. That's not an easy task, but it is the first step, that realizing that is required to finally be free, if freedom is, or to have peace. Om samano mantra samiti samani samana manasaha chittamesham samani va akuti samana hridayani vaha samana mastu vo mano yata vasu sahasati. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat. Come and be your prayer, come and be your end, come and be your purpose, come and be your deliberation, come and be your desires, unified be your hearts, united be your intentions, perfect be the union amongst you. Om, peace, peace, peace.